to our next panel, Secrets from the Retreats. And I hope you really do reveal secrets, real secrets. I'm going to hand it over to our moderator. I'm just going to quickly thank again our sponsors for today, the City of New York Mayor's Office of Media Entertainment and Chicken and Egg Pictures. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to Ella Troiano, who's going to introduce our panel, introduce herself, and then introduce our panel. Ella.
Hi, can you hear me? No, okay.
Got it, you got it.
You got it? Okay, hi. I'm Ella Troiano. I'm very excited to be moderating here today. Secrets of the Retreat. I want to thank DOC New York City, Chicken and Egg, and Creative Capital for bringing me here. But I'd like to also start introducing our panel. We have Alex Hannibal, who is the manager of the documentary program at Tribeca Film Institute. She also manages the funds at TFI and runs the doc program. So we're very excited to hear what she's going to be telling us about these programs. We have Agui Carter, who is a filmmaker, scholar, and president of Iguana Films. She is the winner of the Barnell Best Historical Film in America for her film Rebel, and she's working on a new narrative script with the title of The Secret Life of La Mariposa. We have Thomas Allen Harris, a producer, director, and writer, and the founder and president of Digital Diaspora Family Reunion. And we also have Stephanie Wang-Breal, an independent director and producer. We're so happy to be here today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alex, who will be telling us a little bit, giving us a general overview of the program at Tribeca.
So at TFI, we have two main retreat/workshop programs that we run right now. So the first, we're doing it for the second time this summer in partnership with the Camden International Film Festival. It's sponsored by CNN, and that is a week-long retreat in Camden, Maine, where we take 5 filmmakers up with us, and it's usually when they are just at the end of production or about to start their edit. It's really a chance for us to hunker down for 5 days with no distractions and really dive deep into story structure and character development. So what we'll do is we kind of do a combination of master classes. Last year we had Steve James come up. We had Matt Hamachek, who is an amazing editor. We had Andrea Medic, who's an amazing producer. And we had people like that be there the entire time to kind of really foster a community and creative space where people could really think about their projects in a group creative setting. We don't want to kind of silo off projects and then just have them meet with the people. We just had like big comfy couches and talked about movies for 5 days. And then we do a smaller version of that sponsored by A&E in New York for 3 days in the fall. We've been doing that for 3 years, but it's the same kind of idea. It's really about story structure, about character development, kind of trying to break down your arc. With that one we had Amir Bar-Lev and John Batsek come, and they did like a scene-by-scene breakdown of a Tillman story, which they did together, and that was really great because people could ask questions like as we're all actively watching this bit together. So I think their workshops and retreats are magic. I think they're wonderful.
When you, how do people apply, or how do people get invited to these programs?
So right now we're doing it on an invite basis only, and that mainly is just because bandwidth-wise we don't have enough people to review another set of projects in addition to the 4 funds that we run as well. So right now it's by invite only, but what I encourage people to do is to apply for one of our projects because it's a good way for you to get on our radar in general. And we don't necessarily only invite people to those workshops and to the retreat who we've given funding to. We actually see it as an opportunity to support projects that we might not have been able to give money to or weren't quite ready for this or too far along for that. So if you apply to our funds, then and you can mention like what type of stuff you'd like to do with TFI, you can mention it in there too. So we'll flag it. and say, okay, they might be at a good spot around this time. So that's kind of the way we do it.
Great. Maria, can you talk a little bit about your experience with retreats and labs and workshops? Because you have an interesting history, both as a participant and somebody who actually started her own.
Yes, I brought a short 2-minute clip of the film the most recent film that I made called Rebel. So you can see that I am both an artist who workshopped this project through labs, and then I'll talk about a lab called the Artist Retreat Center, ARC, that I founded through NALIP, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers, which is for diverse writers and directors. And so why don't we send that for, it's 2 minutes. So I show you that because before that film, I had only made archival-based historical documentaries and verite documentaries, but an artist is a dreamer, and a dreamer needs to be able to imagine any kind of film, any kind of artwork that will express the content that they need to express. And labs are for those dreamers, for those people who are nascent, who have dreams bigger than the usual boundaries might hold. And so they are places where you can imagine doing something that is hard to imagine. In my case, that film was created to question the erasure of women in American history. It's about a Latina woman from the 19th century who becomes a Confederate soldier and then turns to become a Union spy during the American Civil War. Subsequently writes a memoir and is attacked as a prostitute and a hoax and erased for 150 years. George Orwell has said, who controls the present controls the past, who controls the past controls the future. And in that case, I felt that I needed to make this film, I needed to find a space for it and a shape for it. And I wasn't hitting the grants the way I wanted to. People were saying, well, you've never directed large war scenes in 19th period history. And at the time, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I said, well, I'm dreaming of it. And how can I get to that place that seems so very far away? And so I ended up being invited to a number of labs, which included the Latino Producers Academy with very prominent mentors who had made very large films before, who could see what I had in mind, who could see the vision, and who helped me find ways to express that vision in a way that the industry could understand and feel comfort that I might be able to do it. And so those labs were integral, not only to helping me find a structure for my story, but also in helping me express in a way that the industry could hear that dream. I have heard the Toni Morrison quote who said, if the book that you want to read doesn't exist, you should write it. You've heard this. And ARC, the Artist Retreat Center, which I founded many years later, after having gone through these experiences of struggling to make an independent film, because I had worked as a producer for WGBH and for cable commission producer for many years. That was my bread and butter job as well, but I was making independent films. And I struggled with the idea that a woman and a person of color has these additional layers of difficulty in being in the film industry. We have to understand that we are in an industry created with another center in mind, not our skin tone, for instance. People have written about the fact that even Kodak film stock and emulsion could not register our black and brown skin tones until the 1970s, when they were lobbied by the wood manufacturing industry, and that is the first time that they actually created those skin tones. So we have to understand that we are in an industry that does not yet have a space for us as women and as filmmakers of color. And I wanted to find a place to strengthen the women who had these big, big dreams about art that they could make, and to support them and help them both believe in themselves, find the center of their story in a deep, deep way. And I wonder if you could just run those pictures so you can see what the Artist Retreat Center looks like. Just while I talk, you can just see what the space looks like. It's a 100-acre private retreat in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. And it's a place, just keep on running. It's a place where we provide room and board, beautiful, beautiful spaces, incredible nature, private walks that you can do in the woods, a nearby waterfall, farm-to-table food cooked by a chef, and belief that each of these women that are chosen through a competitive process with jury selections can do the work that they dream and imagine. And so we work in barns, we workshop, we bring incredible mentors. And one of the key things about this one in particular is that the artists themselves also workshop with one another, looking to find the center of authenticity and originality and honesty in their own stories. And they question themselves. They do critical reflection and workshopping with one another. It's not just mentors imparting wisdom. And that's at the center of this particular lab, as well as a very, very central thing for this lab, which is about strategic envisioning and sustainability for the artists themselves.
And Marie, I wanted to know, you talked a little you had talked about how different the production and development for Rebel and for La Mariposa, and how, you know, working in an environment with labs and retreats changed. Can you talk a little bit about that? That with Rebel you didn't do so many, and
Yes.
now you want to involve community?
Yes, because I had already been working in the documentary field, and my goal for Rebel was to have as many eyeballs as possible to get into schools and to be seen by every teenage girl in America, not just Latina women, to be seen by women. My goal was primarily not festivals, it was primarily public television or a network where I could get millions of eyeballs. And so I worked within that space, and I knew some of the players already, and I kind of worked on my own. I didn't try to do a lot of labs besides the NALIP lab, which I needed in order to help me find my community of fellow filmmakers who were talking about the cultural issues I was trying to express. And I think that hurt me in some sense, because being in a lab helps you to become part of a family within the industry, right? And so one of the most important things that I learned subsequently, actually after starting my own lab, is that the mentors and the people in the industry that are helping you with your lab while you're in the lab, while your work is in progress, take ownership of that beautiful work and want you to succeed, and will continue to help you afterwards. Perhaps they're not able to give you 5-hour sessions over and over again throughout the life of your project, but they remember you and they are your champions, and they talk to other people in the industry, from festivals to other producers to editors to programmers, and tell them about your project. So you become part of that larger community of people being watched, and of people, and you become not just the filmmaker or that filmmaking team, but part of this larger team of champions that want you to succeed.
Thomas, do you think that you could give us some examples? Because Thomas has been to so many different workshops, labs, and retreats. So it'd be great to hear your history.
Okay. Well, I'm going to organize it around my dream. I really appreciate hearing Maria's dream. I've been making films that mine my family narrative and archives for about 23 years. And as I travel around the country, including the last film, Through a Lens Darkly, Black Photographers and the Emergence of the People, it actually intersects a kind of a personal family narrative with larger historical movements, whether it's in the United States in terms of representation of race, or it's in South Africa with my stepdad, who was part of the African National Congress, and uncovering a story that had been buried. And as I traveled around the world, people would come up to me and say, well, I have these family archives and I want to activate them. I want to make them have value and do something creative with them. And so when I started the film that was finished last year, Through a Lens Darkly, I created a transmedia companion project because, I realized at the end of the process it was very difficult to create an outreach project because I was exhausted financially, emotionally. So I created this project, and little did I know it was going to be a kind of parallel production. But it also saved my hide. And it actually, part of it was born through early workshops. And there were more workshops that were kind of more markets, because within the markets, there are workshops, for instance, Sunnyside the Dock. They had a Montreal market, and then one in Sunnyside the Dock, and this was in 2006 and 2007. At that time, they were really way ahead of where we were in terms of new media and outreach and transmedia storytelling. I mean, we weren't doing that here. And so going to those two workshops in France and Canada really put me ahead. I had gone with the idea that I wanted to see if I could get co-production financing, but I came back with a great idea. And then I sought out workshops and retreats to support that. And one was the National Video Resource, which I think was folded into Tribeca. They had an early workshop. And at that workshop, I actually congealed the idea of digital diaspora family reunion. I didn't call it that at the time, but it was something that would be, that would somehow, through an online space, activate people's family photographs and provide the space where people can share and create family using their family photographs, even though they didn't know folks. And then at that workshop was a big funder. And so I left that workshop with $30,000, and so you never know. I had no idea when I started the workshop that she was going to be there, and I didn't have to go through her application process at all. In fact, it was the Diana Barrett with the Fledgling Fund, and after that grant, she actually instituted a more formal application process that I've subsequently gone through. And then from there, we went to BAVAC, the Bay Area Video Coalition, and they had a new media, produced a new media conference. Not so much, it wasn't a conference, it was actually a workshop, a retreat. And they brought us together with all the leading thinkers and doers around new media. And we actually came up not only with the idea development, but with a prototype that we could take and shop. So it was really tangible stuff that I was leaving these workshops with. I started shopping that around at different places, including the National Black Programming Consortium. It's one of the minority consortium. And someone saw the project and they said, well, we actually don't want to fund the online version, but can you do a live action version of that? And we'll pay you to do that. And so all of a sudden, this project, Digital Diaspora Family Reunion, was born. And it really completely changed the way I was thinking about my film, the Black photography film, because I both in the sense that I was able to uncover images that I didn't know existed from people's family photographs. When we did the first roadshow, people showed up with truckloads of images in Atlanta. And so we had to figure out how we were going to process that. We ended up helping people to digitize their family photographs based on narratives they could create. And then it just took off from there. Today, we've actually have held over 40 digital diaspora roadshows. in places all across the United States, but also in Toronto, and I just came back from Ethiopia where I was paid to do one, in Rio de Janeiro, and funders that were early funders also reached out to us and said, well, we'd actually like you to scale it up. And so they've actually hired, or not so much hired us, but they gave us support to create a strategic plan to figure out how to turn this into a business. And so it's yeah, and also a film is coming out of that as well, a digital diaspora family union film. It's not going to be called that, it's going to be called something else. And at one point, early on, I was, when I got money from ITVS said, well, that project is also part of this project. It's part of the Black Photography Project. And so we fought back and forth. You know, they were going to give me some money. And I was like, well, actually, they're different projects. It's an outreach project. And I was able to reach out to the people who I'd done the workshop with and get support. And ultimately, ITVS actually pulled their money. But I was able to keep the ownership of Digital Diaspora. And right after they pulled their money, ironically, CPP gave us money to develop Digital Diaspora. And they had seen us at another workshop, Hot Dogs. So you have these markets and festivals we did, and Tribeca was also significant in terms of developing the project. So we were able to then hop on to Digital Diaspora for 2 years while we developed Through a Lens Darkly and sought funding, and ultimately ITVS came back on board. And so they came on board and they realized, okay, well, we were wrong before. We're going to give you money to finish the film, and you can do Digital Diaspora and be separate. And so, that was really significant. And the reason I'm talking about this is because we're at another kind of pivotal moment where we have this new media, VR, you know, and so it's really important to go out and go to these different workshops that talk about these new types of storytelling. And even if you don't know what, you know, how to get in, the first step, you know, I think it's so important to be exposed to these ideas, because, you know, you can go and want to get, you know, some financing or a commission, but to come away with an idea is so powerful and so empowering and can kickstart anything. The workshop, when I started making Through a Lens Darkly again, I actually changed the focus of it from a kind of simply a historical documentary looking at Black photographers to this other idea that, well, if America had a family photo album, what would African Americans look like in that album? You know, this tension between the stereotype, which we encounter even to this day, every day, versus these other images which are somehow suppressed. Like, you know, Maria was talking about certain narratives suppressed. And so I would not have been able to make that film if I hadn't done Digital Diaspora and use this crowdsourcing. I actually did a presentation at Yale. She says, oh, you're the chief of crowdsourcing. I'm like, I didn't get that much money with my last crowdsourcing campaign. She said, no, but what you got is even more significant in terms of, you know, 18,000 photographs and images. And so, how's my time? Should I run out?
No, I was thinking that this would be a perfect time to show your clip.
Okay, so I'll show the Digital Diaspora clip, and then I do wanted to talk about
we'll
Sundance,
yes.
Sundance workshop.
Yeah.
So that gives you just a little sample of some of what Digital Diaspora does, and now we're taking it to another place, both in terms of developing it and developing as a TV show, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about Through a Lens Darkly, the film. What was great about having developed this transmedia project was that while the film is focusing on Black images and Black photographers, Digital Diaspora has this other kind of aspect. It's much more open and fluid. And I see it as a way to see the culture with stories and with images. You know, because as Maria mentioned earlier, you know, when one interfaces with Hollywood, you know, especially as a person of color, there is a way in which it's slotted, and I want to actually see create other opportunities to tell stories and have the visual material that allows us to do that. And so that's part of what the TV show will do, is actually seed stories with using actors. With Through a Lens Darkly, Black Photographers, Emergence of a People, that film ended up being much more of a poetic expression rather than a kind of didactic documentary, and it was in some ways also a call to action, and which I'm very glad I made it that way, because it's being used by Black Lives Matter and activists around the country. And if I had made it a historical documentary, then I think it would be very different. And that change, making this film much more poetic and much more kind of socially engaged with the present, rather than a historical documentary, happened at the Music and Sound Lab at Sundance. And Sundance, like many of the funders, give you money, but then it also opens up space to do labs. And so I was fortunate to do the Sundance Music and Sound Lab, and I wanted to do the edit lab, but they put me in the Music and Sound Lab, and it really changed the way I thought about making a film with images. My sound designer, previous sound designer, said, well, you can't use sound music or sound design with still images. But when I went to Skywalker with Music and Sound, all of a sudden things opened up, and I was actually able to take out a lot of the text in the film and use it and make it much more poetic, much more experimental, and much more, in some ways, accessible in terms of people thinking about their own family photographs, and also ideas around representation. And that was a 10-day workshop, and I would really encourage people to do it. I was a little bit resistant at first, because I was like, what is Music and Sound going to add to my documentary? And it just changed everything, and opened up space for the film to actually, the film actually went to Sundance, and it went there with Digital Diaspora. So actually, when I went to Sundance with the film, it also went with it as a transmedia project in New Frontiers.
Great. And Stephanie, do you want to tell us about your experience?
I'm not doing anything as ambitious as Tom's out there. So I am an independent director-producer. I made 2 films called Well, I Need Mommy and Tough Love. Tough Love was at DOC NYC last year. And I think that what I can contribute to this conversation for you guys in terms of retreats and labs, I participated in the WGBH Producers Academy Lab, and it was a great experience. As everyone has mentioned here on this panel, it's a place where sort of time stands still. It's a place where you get to dream and think of new ways of doing things. You get to be inspired by what you're seeing your fellow artists doing, but also you get to be inspired about the work you're currently working on, as well as ideas you've had, and how you can take those ideas and translate them into film or sound or images in a new way that you've never really thought or considered before. So it's wonderful for all those things. But I also think that it's really wonderful, as Maria had mentioned, in terms of mentorship and meeting and access, meeting new people. You get a chance to hang out with industry and insiders, festival programmers, funders, in a way that you don't normally get to spend time with them. And you also get to exercise new ways of behaving. You know, one thing that we did at the WGBH Lab, which I thought with this Producers Academy, was a pitch. We were allowed to put together a 3-minute pitch for Simon Kilmurray, who was the former executive director of POV, as well as the executive director of Frontline, Annie, I can't remember her last name right now, Rainey. Excuse me. And that was a great experience for all of us. We were all very nervous. We were all helping each other. We were all getting ready, and we were all rooting each other on. So it was a great collective, I think, room experience, but also something you don't normally do, prepare a 3-minute pitch in front of people who can actually give you money. So for those practical experiences, it was very, very helpful as well. Another thing that I participated in was I've been teaching.
But before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about being at the WGBH as somebody who was a little bit more experienced than everybody else, because we do want to talk a little bit about what to expect. And you mentioned something that was really important. As a woman, you went
Yeah, so I was also at the lab, 7 months pregnant with my second child, and shooting my Tough Love, where I was flying to Seattle every other week. So I was exhausted, and so every night everyone went out together. But because I was so pregnant, I was exhausted, but also I couldn't drink, so it wasn't fun to go out when everyone's singing karaoke and getting blasted together, which is fantastic. I'm a total proponent of that. I love karaoke. Don't watch out. But yeah, like just in terms of like my place in my film career and my place in life, I just felt like I was unable to participate as much as I would have liked to. And then one good thing about the CPPB Producers Academy is that you get to meet a lot of programmers from stations and hear more about the public television aspect of what they're thinking and how they're thinking and how they program things. So that was really interesting to me in terms of my experience level. But I think that a lot of the filmmakers there were more first-time emerging filmmakers, a lot of filmmakers of color, which was fantastic. So there are some I think that there are some classes that I really had understood and it was not as beneficial for me, I think.
Okay. And then you have an International Viewer Master class, which I think is really important.
So then I also got to hang out with Alex in Taiwan. I speak Mandarin, and I taught a master class at the CNEX Producers Academy, I guess. It's like a pitching lab, but it's also like teaching master classes and workshops. And that was so great because as a Chinese American filmmaker, who speaks Chinese, who grew up, spent a lot of time in Taipei as a kid, it was so fun to hang out with all these commissioning editors from Europe and Alex.
Great tour guide.
And hang out. We did not do karaoke.
I know, we did not. We didn't go that far.
Didn't go that far. And I could drink then, so it was a lot of fun. But it was like just such a great moment to relax and hang out. And also at that lab, I got to see so many young Chinese filmmakers and their work and what they're trying to do in their countries. And that was so inspiring and beautiful to see. And show them, our side of the world in a way. So it was really, really fantastic.
Yeah, Marie?
I do want to mention a couple of things. One is I just want to follow up that unfortunately the CPB PBS Producers Lab, which I was also in at one point, is now closed, and that's such a loss for us because I think it made such a difference in helping independent producers understand and begin to enter into the PBS world. Oftentimes that's a perfect place for us to show our films.
But she launched a new one, The Next Generation.
She's launching, but it's very different.
Okay.
So I do want to mention a couple of other labs. One is Firelight Media, Stanley Nelson's lab that is terrific and a great place to look at for mentoring and for access also into public television. It's partially funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and I'm a mentor there for documentary people. Also, international labs are very, very important, and you should be looking internationally. I am moving from telling stories in documentary now to trying to tell my next story in a narrative form. I feel very excited because I'm a new student in an old industry that I thought I knew, and now I'm discovering all these wonderful things. And I think that the form needs to follow content, and so for this next story, I felt I needed to tell it in narrative. And I've done a few of those labs for narrative screenwriters, and the very best one that I've been to has been Sine Qua Non, which is in Michoacan, Mexico. It just so happens that the artistic director of Sine Qua Non is here from Mexico, and I invited him to come. And so, Jesus Pimentel, can you please stand up? This is really, I hope you will go up to him if you are a narrative screenwriter. It was superb, and we had about a dozen people from around the world. And there's something very special about having an international group of artists, because you have to think about the universality and of your story, but also how do people understand it? How does that story resonate from other cultural perspectives? Just terrific. And there are many others, Berlin, there's so many others, so I think we should always, as, you know, we're so used to exporting our stories out to the world in Hollywood, and yet as documentarians and as independents, we are artists of the world, and so it behooves us to also be conscious of the incredible diaspora of art being created around the world, and that in turn feeds us as well.
But I also do think that the labs in general, you do feel like there's a cultural exchange going on, not just in the filming language, but in like everything that we're all experiencing together. I think that that's a beautiful description of it.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm a mentor, second-time mentor with Firelight Lab, and that's a really, really amazing lab. And you know, one of the things that it's not an official retreat, but it can be when you go to a film festival and you don't have a film festival. It can be really fun. In addition, you meet people in a way that's much less stressful, and you're not after people to ask them for things, but you're going and seeing films, you're networking with fellow filmmakers who have amazing resources. In this room, we have resources that we don't know, and I think that is so important because the relationships, as you said, that you create in these situations, they're mini labs, that the lab idea can be extended beyond a certain type of lab where you have to apply to get into. You can actually take that lab mentality with you, and I would encourage people because when you finish a film, it's so competitive to get your film into festivals, to get it launched, and to be at a festival, to meet people, to have a relationship. And this is such a relationship game. And so it's so important to do that when you're not in a place where you're constantly like having to ask someone for something. You can actually offer someone support for their film, or show up and do some service at the festival, et cetera, et cetera.
Thomas, how do you prepare? Because you're really good at nurturing relationships. I know we discussed this and you said me, but how do you prepare when you go to class? Do you have an idea of who might be there?
Well, I mean, I really like people, so I try. I meditate, and that's a big way of preparing, and do yoga. But I just came back from Ethiopia, and I didn't want to go. I was there for 3 weeks. I was UNESCO and the American Embassy and the African Union brought me there to work with 14 students to help them, 14 film students to help them change the African narrative, from one of despair, and how do they change it as young journalists and filmmakers. And it was so popular that I ended up, I go there and have 70 students. So in terms of preparing, and I just basically I had to kind of work on the fly, and it was so amazing just to be open to learning from my students, and that it is always an exchange, and to be open to that, and to listen to them, and to I still had my syllabus I tried to keep to as much as possible. It was exhausting, but it's about creating these relationships, and also being curious. I think as documentary filmmakers, we are curious about people who are different than you, and being open and being non-judgmental, trying to leave my American projections. Is this going to be in place? Is that going to be in place? There's a certain amount of fear of what's happening in Ethiopia now. And it's just to be open, but to be aware. And one of the most amazing experiences I had there, in addition to working with the young students and the local folks there, was working with this narrative filmmaker who we workshopped a digital diaspora project, and that was pretty amazing. It was the last day before I was leaving, and so we might be working together, and both for digital diaspora, but also going back to do some work on the continent as well.
Great.
And I also met Maria in Helsinki. We became friends doing input and doing that workshop.
I was actually really interested in how we all sort of know, some of us know each other, and how we met. I know I met you at an ITVS party because we had gotten funded. And I'm a filmmaker, I'm a creative capital grantee, and I remember that I always tell people this story when we do workshops, because I talk about having you know, I usually never used to go to any of these parties, but as part of my strategic planning homework, I had to go and meet different people. So I remember you caught my eye and you immediately, you were so generous. You came to me, you asked me, so what is your project? I had my little elevator speech prepared, what I was doing, and you said the Ford Foundation is going to be interested in your program. And I thought the Ford Foundation, so I called an academic that I knew. He set up the meeting, and within a month and a half, I actually was able to get an additional $60,000 to a project that had been fully funded by ITVS. And it didn't exist, but it was just because you shared that information with me. And you know, that is what is really key in following up. And also I think that when we go to many of these labs and retreats, we think it's all about the consultants. And actually in my case, I can tell you that I have had lifelong friendships with the people that I meet at these labs and retreats. So I was kind of curious, anybody, so you met, how did you meet Maria in Helsinki?
Yeah, we were Corporation for Public Broadcasting Fellows, brought to the Input Conference, which is an international conference of public television stations from around the world. And we both had new projects and we were brought in. I really want to underscore what you both have said about meeting other people. Certainly at the labs, it is often your cohort, the other fellows at the lab or the conference or whatever, who are your colleagues, who you will share with opportunities. And I can't tell you how many jobs and grants I've gotten through the kindness of my colleagues who knew my projects intimately because we workshopped them together and saw something and gave that recommendation, or were on a panel, or understood what the project was about and what I was trying to do as a filmmaker. And so oftentimes it is about your cohort, the group that you are there with as fellow artists.
Great, and with that, I think we want to turn it over to you. What questions do you have for this amazing panel? Yeah.
Thank you for this session. This has been so informative and inspiring and a boatload of ideas, so thank you so much. For first-time filmmakers, can you mention online resources that list all of these labs, and can you give us advice on the best way to, get into one?
Can we repeat the question? Online resources for these labs.
I recommend that everybody go to the POV website. They have done a brilliant thing and put all of the funding applications, their due dates, when things open, when things close, for labs and for funding in a Google Doc that you can just download and it'll go directly onto your computer. So I just recommend everybody, it's the best thing. It was so smart of them to do it. So I recommend that anybody and everybody just go to POV's website and get that. Beyond that, it's always good to just follow the organizations and institutions that you're interested in, whether it be on Twitter, on Facebook, if they have a mailing list, do that. Because I know that for us, a lot of it has to do with blasting all of that out to our filmmakers whenever something new comes up, like we could just have a new funder who wants to do something. So 6 months from now, we could have a new lab, and who knows? So it's just kind of being, for me, honestly, most of my social media now is based on the documentary world and what's going on, whether it be filmmakers that I am friends with who are posting stuff, or institutions, because I follow all of them too. So I think that's the best way to kind of keep up with what's going on, because we post all of that stuff.
Great.
Yeah, and I think also just telling people what your project is,
Yeah.
and what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And so when people hear it comes across their desk, then they email that to you. They might be in a listserv that you might not be on.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I just had to point out, Thomas, you had the best line that I've heard the entire festival, where you said, "Oh, the sound guy said I couldn't do that." But when I went to Skywalker, you just threw that out. But just some real newbie questions. How competitive? I know there's a range, but sort of in general, how competitive are these labs? And how far along do you generally need to be? And do you pay for them, or are they free to you?
So I think it depends. I can mainly speak in terms of.
Can we repeat the question?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
How competitive are the labs and how much do they cost?
So
how far along do you need?
And how far along? So in terms of the labs that we do, we cover everything. So if you're invited to come, we'll fly you to wherever it is that you need to be. We'll feed you and we'll put you up for that time. There are some cases when we usually do it for 2 people in a team. If you want to bring a 3rd person, then there might be a discussion about like, oh, maybe can you cover that extra flight or whatever, just because, we're still a nonprofit, we've got budgets. But for the most part, we will cover 2 people to come to whatever it is that we're doing. And we'll feed you and entertain you the whole time that you're there. And then in terms of competitive, they are competitive, unfortunately, because for me personally, I think something that's so great about them is that they are small. I think it loses some of it if it becomes like a larger thing where too many opinions are getting involved. But if you just have 10 people in a room in a circle for 5 days, a lot more can happen and a lot more can go places. But there are a lot of labs, and I would recommend kind of keeping your eye out on the ones that you think are good for you. Because you don't want to end up saying yes to like 4 labs and you're learning how to pitch 4 different times for the same movie. Like nobody needs that, and it gets just like a little. You get muddled in your brain because you're getting different opinions from different people. So I would be kind of selective in having like, maybe at this stage it would be good if I did this one or this one. During this stage of your production, I would do this one or this one. For us. For the 2 main labs that we do now, we're looking for things that are in the midst of production or about to enter post, because we're really talking about story structure and stuff like that. So we're going to do like deep dives into what your scene construction is, how you're developing your characters, what you want your narrative to be. And it's hard to do that if you're still in the middle of your shoot. So for us, that's the main thing, but there are plenty of pitching labs that want to do things that are earlier on in the process. So yeah, that's.
Maria?
I would say for most of them, you're not going to just come in with an idea because it's so competitive, and they're not places to brainstorm about ideas. So usually they're places where you've been thinking quite deeply about something and have made some headway. Oftentimes a work in progress is already, has been shot and created, something farther along. And because it's so hard to finish a film, a lab is also thinking about which projects are viable, and it's hard to tell if your project is viable unless you're far enough along, and that is part of the judging process. I would say all of them are pretty competitive. For something like Sine Qua Non or the Sundance Screenwriters Lab or many of the Screenwriters Lab, you have to have written your full script, but that doesn't mean you don't still have a lot of work to do. And for many of the other labs where you're workshopping for documentary, oftentimes you've been shooting and you've got some kind of cut, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes you do.
And just as a first-time filmmaker, I didn't do any labs, and I didn't have the bandwidth, I didn't know about them, and I think that that's something that you should know. I do think that first-time filmmakers get invited, but I think it's more rare. So I think that another option is to find someone who's made a film similar to yours or a similar subject matter or who's passionate and try to find a mentor. Because mentors can do so much for you, so much more than maybe a lab can sometimes even do. So that's also what I would advise.
At the previous panel, Yvonne Wellman of Chicken and Egg was mentioning a new lab that was starting out. And I think that's something that we often overlook. Everybody applies to the same one, but you're not looking at others that could be potentially great or residencies.
Hot Docs has a really good one in the summer.
Talent Campus in Berlin, amazing. Any other, yes?
Yeah, I'll just add, I don't think it's been mentioned, but there's also the Bayback Producers Lab, which is a national lab. I'm actually from an organization in Washington DC called Docs of Progress. We do stuff with filmmakers in DC, a fellowship program, but we also do a peer pitching. It's a one-day thing that we do both at AFI Docs in DC and at the Sebastopol Documentary Film Festival out in California. So there's a lot of different opportunities, and Maria, I really love what you said about if the opportunity isn't there, create it for yourself.
Yeah, I would just say, dovetailing off of that, in the 80s, there was a series of workshops that were supported by public television there, and out of that, Isaac Julian and a bunch of other filmmakers came out, and so getting together with a group of 4 filmmakers to meet over the course of, let's say, like 6 months or 4 months, you get a momentum. You can even invite guest speakers, to come in and talk. That it's something that is easily accessible, especially in a place like New York, or there's certain places where you have a certain critical mass.
Yeah, it's definitely about the community element of it. I mean, one of the A&E workshop that we did last year, those 5 filmmaking teams, they all still meet and talk and run through rough cuts together and do all the stuff completely independently of us. So we're kind of like not even a part of it anymore, but I think it's being really open and being ready to kind of take in information and equally give information. Because when you do come in, you're like, well, this is my film and I'm just here for like the FaceTime, you can kind of tell, and it does affect what you take out of that experience. I think all doc filmmakers are, like you said, they're just naturally inquisitive people. And as a result, we roll in packs. So if you can create some sort of a pack, then you might not even need organizations to do what you need to do.
Yeah, to follow up on what you said, Alex, right in New York, there's Film Fatales, right? Are there any Film Fatale members here? It's a group of women filmmakers in doc and in narrative, and now there are chapters in many other cities as well, and they're terrific, and they're people who share opportunities and workshop with one another. There's a writers thing going on through them, but we for Sine Qua Non, we just did a script. The group that was there this past summer, we just did a script swap, and so about 5 of us had new rewrites and critiqued one another. So I agree, people continue to meet subsequently and push each other to move forward on their projects.
I was actually at Maria's retreat this past year, and the group of 10 women are like a little family, and we have one right there, and we also have from Creative Capital. Oh, 2! And also from Creative Capital, we have Colleen Keegan, who's here, who really began the strategic planning and the professional development program at Creative Capital, which has been absolutely amazing. And I invite you all, please go on the Creative Capital website and check out all of the offerings there. We have one question, but if you have a question, yes, go.
Just a quick question. That it looks like that a lot of people are New York City based. So if you are an independent documentary filmmaker, you either have to live in New York or have to come here very often. So what could people do who don't live in New York or live abroad and sometimes come here? So what are the opportunities?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, what do you do if you don't live in New York when it all seems so New York centered?
At Tribeca, we are making an effort to kind of break that. We're making a concerted effort to recognize that there are filmmakers from all over. I travel a lot internationally to other film festivals and participate in their markets and in their panels in an effort to meet with other filmmakers and let them know about our stuff. We used to do a whole set of workshops, pitching workshops in different countries in Latin America. We're kind of reshifting that now. But we recognize that you know, documentaries are made all over the world and by all sorts of people. So we are trying to kind of make that an easier thing. But I also encourage you to look at where you live, because there are plenty of resources there. And within those resources, whatever foundation is that you're working, that's local for you, they might be working with us or with Sundance or with Hot Docs or something, because we're all, you know, like we met in Taiwan through, because I was working with an organization, she was working with an organization. So
Not in New York.
yeah, not in New York. So, you know, we're making an effort to kind of be all over the place so that we can invite new people.
And just to mention all these labs that we've been talking about, retreats, people are coming from all over the country to these different labs. They don't live in New York. As a matter of fact, most people, only a few of them might come from New York. They come from all over. You apply from wherever you are, and you're accepted to these, and they're held wherever they're held, all over, not just New York.
And in all honesty, the best, most productive ones are actually held outside of the city. The city can be really distracting. So we try and get out to get to a place where there's trees and nature and people can think creatively.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one last thing. You talked about Colleen and strategic planning. I mean, it's also good to think outside the box and collaborate. I'm collaborating with someone who has an MBA, and so to actually bring other types of people who might be interested in filmmaking but are not necessarily filmmakers, and see what they add to the mix in terms of creating a sustainable model for making films and supporting your work.
And I'm going to add one little secret before I do something that I was asked to do. And the secret is from having worked with filmmakers and artists in the last 10 years through the Creative Capital Professional Development Program, one of the key things that we forget about is follow-up. You can all get in touch with everybody here. If you don't do it right away, you can do it later. People want to hear from you. They are looking for filmmakers, they are looking for projects that are really interesting, so remember to follow up. And the other thing is, that I was asked by Yvonne, is to give you a little exercise. And this is something that we did when I was first at Creative Capital, because I was such a lousy speaker in front of people. And this is my first moderating panel. And that is to make sure that today you meet 3 new people or somebody that you sort of know and follow through with them, because I think it makes a huge difference. Okay, and with that, thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. You've been amazing. Thank you.